my video where I talked about hacking minigames and the related topic of pushback, I was talking about how there's a subtle difference between challenging the player and making the player feel challenged. I'd like to address a related topic that came to mind while I was chatting with my Second Wind colleagues the other day, because that's all we do at Second Wind Towers, just high-minded intellectual debate and brainstorming mildly offensive t-shirts about the contrast between a game like Starfield and a game like Outer Wilds. In short, the difference between a game that feels big as opposed to a game that merely is big. There was a moment in the history of video games where we crossed a threshold. I don't know exactly when it was, but it can't have been that long ago. It was the point when a video game being bigger, with more expansive open worlds and more stuff to do than ever before, stopped being impressive. My first instinct is to blame No Man's Sky, but I want to say it was some point during the development of Starfield, because Starfield seemed convinced it was winning us over when it promised us thousands of explorable planets with so many things to see and do, and then it came out and audiences responded with the bored raspberry heard round the world. What the hell do you expect us to do with 1,000 explorable planets? We collectively asked. I can't even be bothered to explore around the back of my loo. It's funny to think of that reaction and compare it to something like Elite, which created a gigantic universe but where there was even less to do than in Starfield in terms of variety of activities, but it blew everybody's minds at the time just because it was bigger than anything that had ever been seen before. There was a time when a lot of video games would sell themselves by listing how many different rooms the game had, and you don't even have to go far back in time to find games that blew us all away simply from being big. Just Cause 2 springs to mind, with a sandbox map of about 1,000 square kilometers to explore on hang glider, ground vehicle, boat and aircraft, all spontaneously produced from the main character's rectum, and the sheer size of that world and its variety of terrain was enough to make me giddy. Somewhere along the line, we all stopped being impressed by how much was being squeezed into games. Maybe it was the growing perception of how much of these big worlds are procedurally generated, to very deliberately say nothing of AI, so it was less impressive to consider the work that went into something when that work might have just been flipping a switch on the Terrainotron. Maybe since graphics technology has more or less plateaued, there's less of a sense among the community that bigger, more spectacular games are really showing off to the wider world what games can do. Maybe audiences have gotten savvier and now demand depth of gameplay and plot over merely having higher numbers than before. Maybe Ubisoft poisoned the well by overdoing open world sandboxes and rewired our expectations to make us think a big world just means more boring commuting and more grinding out checklists of repetitive tasks. Maybe with so much entertainment vying for our attention these days, we're more conscious and resentful of games trying to monopolize too much of our time. Recently I played LEGO Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight, and after I activated the radio towers to reveal all the hidden collectibles and puzzles on the map, yes, that old chestnut, unironically even, I took one look at the map, now drenched in repeating white icons, and went, oh for fuck's sake, I had other shit I wanted to do today. This is a shame, because considering that art is all about provoking emotion, awe and wonder and the horror of the sublime are nice emotions to feel. This might surprise you to hear, but I don't relish being jaded. Well, not all of the time. I wish I could crank my mindset back to when I was young and naive and could still be blown away by all the different kinds of trees you can ignore in Assassin's Creed Shadows. But that sense of awe is something that can be created without necessarily beating previous size records. In other words, there is a difference between being big and feeling big. The Colossi in Shadow of the Colossus, for example, are big, but it's not their bigness that makes them feel big. They're about the same size as, say, the boss monsters in Serious Sam the First Encounter, but those don't feel big, because you can tell from the way they look and move that they just took a regular-sized enemy and blew it up to building proportions. The enemies in Shadow of the Colossus move like grassy hills that have just woken up from a long nap. They're slow, ponderous, dust and earth falling off them in sheets. You get a real sense for the weight they're struggling to carry around, and you can really appreciate the fine details of their bodies as you clamber up their legs and bury your face in their pubic hair. The point is, bigness is about more than size. This whole conversation started when we were comparing Starfield and Outer Wilds, and that's a perfect example of how bigness versus feeling big can apply to a game as a whole. Starfield is objectively a big game. Thousands of planets, who knows how many quests, and mechanics up the wazoo, space dogfighting, gunfights, RPGing, the works, but it doesn't feel big while you're playing it. There's no sense of wonder or of the bigness of the cosmos, and I put that down to how disconnected it is. There's little connection between the disparate game mechanics. You can't stop piloting your spaceship at any moment and switch to first person on the ground combat. You certainly go to a lot of places, but you get to all of them by fast travelling through menus, and there's no sense of the distance between the places. For all you know, they're just different sound stages in the same movie studio. Meanwhile, Outer Wilds is nowhere near as big in terms of total amount of explorable space, but it feels like such a grander, more epic journey, because all the planets are carefully crafted, full of so many details to help you piece together the mysteries of the cosmos. And most importantly, we don't cut out the travel time. time. We can take off from a planet and land on a completely different one with no seams and no loading screens, so subconsciously, we have a constant understanding of where everything is in relation to each other. Relatedly, I never minded the long boat journeys in Zelda Wind Waker, because I remember what a great job the travelling did of creating a sense of an epic adventure between the heroic music and the rolling waves and all the points of interest on the horizon we know we're going to investigate at some point. I think excessive fast travelling is an important part of how big worlds are being made to feel small. It's the problem with a lot of Ubisoft-style sandboxes. Designers get so concerned with not inconveniencing players so they can get back to the all-important numbers grinding that they forget how important pushback can be in creating a sense of investment. Just recently I've been playing the Gothic remake, and that relatively small open world is made to feel big, some might say obnoxiously so, by having no fast travel at all, and savaging you with rabid wolves every time you walk 50 yards. Interesting counterpoint though, the Thief series. Thief 2 does a great job of making its city feel huge and lived in and real, even though it's not an open world at all. It's level based. It's got seams and loading screens for days. It's the variety of environments you visit, the glimpses of endless rooftops in the skybox, the city's obvious sense of unique culture reflected by its residents and architecture, the dense soundscape and atmosphere connecting it all. Meanwhile, compare it to Thief 3 Deadly Shadows, which does have an open world. It removes the seams, well, it doesn't entirely, but let's not get hung up on details, and you do gain an awareness of the distance between locations, and yet it feels so much smaller than the city in Thief 1 and 2 because it removes the mystery. The city was so much grander a place when our imagination was having to fill in the blanks. So when we get right down to it, there's a lot of complicated detail that goes into making a big thing feel big, but if you want a short, very uninformative summary, most of it comes down to vibes. I mean, in Shadow of the Colossus, when a dude the size of a modestly proportioned library slams the trunk of a redwood tree into the ground 3 feet away from me, I don't think anyone would argue there's not a lot of vibes going on. Certainly not whoever has to launder my underpants.